Okay. Okay, here we go. We're going to start with a great question one of our classmates asked after last class. This is what they said. I'm right here. I was once told that the reason why we shouldn't learn Kabbalah, etc., was because we have to know the foundations of belief well first, Tanakh, etc. Only then, after that was mastered, could the Kabbalah be introduced, and it takes several lifetimes to achieve that, whatever that means. It was felt that too many people chose spirituality without the meat, so to speak. Perhaps before the rabbis banned meditation, Zohar, etc., we were on that level of mastery, but haven't been since. Very good point. It's important to understand the nuts and bolts, the meat and potatoes, before you go into loftier realms. Very good. Okay. Given that, so how does that relate to our dilemma that spirituality was lost, that meditation was put in a box? Okay, so here's my response. I think it is true for the study of Kabbalah and mysticism in general. If you are not grounded, you could go crazy. Not so for meditation. Every person could and should learn meditation, even children. Meditation is the foundation of prophecy. It's also the foundation of martial arts, prayer, and all of life. This is true in many Eastern cultures. So far in our study of Rabbi Kaplan, he does seem to say that meditation was banned along with prophecy. But the question is, why ban meditation in other parts of life, especially prayer? We don't run the risk of going crazy just by meditating. So why did meditation disappear from all of Jewish life if only prophecy was banned? Unless we are supposed to be a nation of prophets, I'm not sure. And I want to make mention of the fact that the emails that we send out to advertise these classes quote cheetah. That's really a cheetah, it's not an L, it's cheetah. And we'll talk a little bit about him. And this is his comment. The root of everything is meditation. It is a very great and lofty concept, making a person worthy of all holiness. When a person meditates, he is clothed with holiness. When one meditates, he is also attached to God, even with regard to his mundane bodily needs. So according to this Kabbalist, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai, who lived here in the 18th century, he's saying that meditation is the foundation of all parts of life. This is how we achieve holiness. This is how we cleave to Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so what is it? Why did Chazal at the time of the Second Commonwealth stop meditation in addition to prophecy? If they were afraid of people just getting crazy and not having a grounding in basic text, in Tanakh and so on, they should have just put prophecy in a box. Why did they put meditation in a box as well? Why didn't they leave meditation for all the other parts of life, including prayer? Okay. I'd like to hear your comments. Remember, after meditation, we're going to have a schmooze time where people can make comments and ask questions. But that's our dilemma. So one of the things we should look at, if I could find the resources at some point, is what was Jewish education like at the time of the Second Commonwealth? And was meditation part of it? Okay, so we'll take a little bit of historical reflection when we get that information. And here's Cheetah, born in Jerusalem, and so on and so on. So here was an advocate of meditation saying how important it is, but we don't have it. Okay. Now we're going to finish up the historical perspective, which was kind of this kind of curve. The curve was, it was prominent 2,000 years ago. We started the downward turn ever since. In the 1700s, 1800s, it made a brief attempt at resuscitation, which we'll see here, but it was put under wraps until basically the middle of the 20th century, with Rabbi Kaplan and the Lubavitcher Rebbe getting involved. So this is an account of the last few attempts to resuscitate it. Okay. The two events at the end of the meditation's career among our nation featured, first of all, Sabbatai Tzvi. Okay, what is that about? False Messiah, 1626 to 1676. As Rabbi Kaplan describes, this charismatic individual twisted the teachings of Kabbalah and used it to support his warped messianic claims. His career ended when he was challenged by the Turkish Sultan. He chose to convert to Islam rather than suffer martyrdom, leaving thousands of his followers totally disillusioned. The false Messiah gave mysticism a bad name and brought about the eclipse of Jewish mysticism and meditation for almost a century. So according to Rabbi Kaplan, we had Jewish spirituality / mysticism too heavily associated with one individual, Sabbatai Tzvi, and this individual turned out to be a bad apple, turned out to be what people consider to be a traitor, and out goes the baby with the bathwater. People became disenchanted with him and didn't follow him, and therefore they didn't follow his teachings, which is very interesting because according to Rabbi Kaplan's report, it seems that the general public did not say, wait a minute, this guy turned out to be a bad apple, but what about what he was saying? Does that mean what he was teaching about mysticism and spirituality was really that bad? It's kind of what we were saying at the beginning of the class when we were chatting. You may not like the guy, but what were his policies? So you may not like Sabbatai Tzvi, but what was he teaching? Were his teachings worth something? Apparently to Rabbi Kaplan, enough people did not make that assessment, and they basically said, no more Sabbatai Tzvi, no more false Messiah, no more mysticism, no more meditation. Okay. Now, just to give a little bit of an insight into Sabbatai Tzvi, I got a report here from My Jewish Learning, which basically says that this poor man might have suffered from severe bipolar disorder. And those times when he claimed to be the Messiah and was a charismatic leader might have been symptomatic of his being on the upswing of the bipolar. And then he goes into a downswing. So I guess in those days, nobody had this understanding of psychology and could basically say, what we really have is a sick person here, not necessarily an evil person or not necessarily a fake Messiah, somebody who's just sick and shouldn't be followed for that reason. So I'm going to post this into the group, but that's a little bit insight into what happened to this man and how did he go off the deep end to such a point where he went from being a charismatic leader of the Jewish nation to a convert. Okay. Okay, the last blast of popularity of Jewish mysticism, experienced a brief renaissance, was with the Baal Shem Tov and Hasidism. Okay. Rabbi Kaplan reports, a renaissance of Jewish mysticism occurred in the middle of the 18th century under the leadership of the famed Rabbi Israel known as the Baal Shem Tov, 1698 to 1760. The Hasidic movement, which he founded, was based on mysticism, and meditative exercises were central to the movement. An important early Hasidic technique involved using the daily service as a meditative exercise. We're going to get into that. Not only did the Hasidic movement bring meditation back into Judaism, but it infused the Jewish community with new energy and commitment as well. As we're going to see later, the shuckling that we see people doing, the Hasidim do it, other Jews do it, that originally was a form of meditation. And it was to attune the body to what the mind is saying. And of course, it made me think of martial arts and Tai Chi and things when you're using movement to have a mind-body connection. Okay. So just a little bit about the Baal Shem Tov, which I'm going to post again in the group. Here we go. He was an orphan. Let's see. His parents, Eliezer and Sarah, were quite old when he was born, and they passed away when he's still a very young child. Okay. And here's what the report is. The young orphan was cared for by the community and presumably received the same education most children received. Nevertheless, he was different from most children. He would wander in the fields and forests surrounding his home and seclude himself, pouring out his heart to God. That, my friends, is hitbodedut. And that's going to be a type of meditation, which we're also going to discuss. Rabbi Nachman, if you're familiar with him, was a strong practitioner of hitbodedut, the shurish of that being beit daled daled, to be of yourself and by yourself, both in your own mind, but also externally by yourself in a secluded place, in an environment where you could think reflective thoughts and go deep inside yourself. So he was a natural practitioner of hitbodedut. And as this report indicates, this is what helped him form his relationship with God, his connection to God. It was meditation that helped him do this. Okay. And which helped him form what we call chassidut. Okay. So meditation was central to the life of the Baal Shem Tov, and therefore he helped make meditation a central practice of the movement chassidut that he formed. Okay. However, chassidut didn't take on, at least at this time. Why? As Rabbi Kaplan explains, the established Jewish community saw the embryonic Hasidic movement as a threat. Since it had adopted unique and distinctive practices, many Jewish leaders felt that the movement could become a cult. It was also felt that the movement was too closely associated with a single personality, a trait reminiscent of the Sabbatai Tzvi fiasco. A powerful opposition to Hasidism arose, going so far as to excommunicate the entire movement. Leading rabbinical sages throughout Europe were marshaled to express their opposition to the movement in the strongest terms. Let's just go down to where we are. That's where we are right here, number 2. This in turn had its effect on the Hasidic movement. Some elements of this movement took a road that had been traveled earlier, reducing all its mystical teachings to philosophy. Others chose to institutionalize the role of spiritual master, making allegiance to a master or rebbe the main distinguishing feature of Hasidism. Okay. What a shame, because basically what he's describing is this. He's basically saying there was the Enlightenment period of the Jews, placing a heavy emphasis on intellectualism, and taking an intellectual approach to religious practice. And he says that part of the new Hasidic movement, even though they were based on mysticism and spirituality, kind of sold out. They basically said, okay, we want to be accepted by you people. So what we'll do is we'll minimize the spiritual and the mystical, including, of course, the meditative, and we'll treat Hasidism as an intellectual pursuit that kind of caved to the pressures of the enlightened intellectual Jews to pursue that path. Okay. And those that didn't, Rabbi Kaplan's basically saying, okay, those people that want to maintain the mystical and spiritual will almost become cult-like, but not exactly, and have a rebbe. We're going to follow, we're going to have a charismatic leader to follow. Okay. Interestingly, okay, so to wrap this up, Rabbi Kaplan says, interestingly, during the first 3 generations of Hasidism, there was hardly a published work on the subject that did not contain some mention of meditation and the mystical experience. In later works, however, mysticism is notably lacking. That shows the trend towards intellectualism. Indeed, in many areas after 1850, the Hasidic movement developed a strong anti-mystical trend. Thus, one of the last bastions of Jewish meditation fell, and the entire practice was forgotten for over a century. That's 1850 to 1950. Even the basic vocabulary of meditation seemed to have been lost. scholars wrote about Jewish mysticism, but ignored blatant references to meditation. Keywords for meditation were either mistranslated or misinterpreted. A situation arose in which meditation was virtually erased from the Jewish consciousness and obliterated from Jewish history. So the last blast of meditation and spirituality in mainstream Judaism was here. It stopped in 1850 when the Hasidic movement basically purged itself of all these references. When we get to meditation and the Bible, we will see that through Rabbi Kaplan's wonderful research, he captured all the great references to meditation in Tanakh, and there's a lot of them. There's a huge vocabulary that describes various meditative techniques that the VM used and that your rank and file Jew used, and that's what was lost, and that's what we're reclaiming. Okay. And he mentions that Kavanah is one of them. We're going to go over Kavanah. But now what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about the Amidah. Okay. And if you recall, the Amidah became a meditative exercise. How? Because when the Anshe Knesset Hagdalah made this editorial decision to not allow meditation / prophecy to be taught to the rank and file Jews, they understood that there still was a need for meditation of some sort. So they actually established the Amidah as a meditative practice. And this is how he describes it. Okay. This, I'm sure, is going to sound familiar to you. Okay. This is what he says, Rabbi Kaplan. One of my students, a psychiatrist / healer, once told me that when he began his involvement in spiritual practices, he used to rush through the morning service so that he would have time to meditate. This went on for a few months. Then in one of our classes, Rabbi Kaplan used to teach meditation classes. We discussed how the worship service itself was originally designed to be a meditative exercise and how it could be used as such. After this, he told me, instead of rushing through the morning service, he used the service itself as his daily meditation. Okay. Many Jews, he says, are still uncomfortable with meditation. They feel that it is something from another culture tacked onto Judaism. Although many traditional sources discuss Jewish meditation, after a century of neglect, many Jews find the notion difficult to accept. Even the word meditation has an alien ring to it, as if it were something borrowed from another world. On the other hand, the most accepted manner for a Jew to relate to God is through the daily services, the daily prayer services. An observant Jew worships or davens 3 times a day in most communities, the synagogues, services, okay. And he talks about Shacharit, Mincha, and Mariv, the morning, afternoon, evening services, okay. And he mentions that the Amidah, of course, is the focus of each of these services. The Amidah translated meaning that which involves standing. The Amidah is a silent prayer that must be said while one is standing. We'll get into that. On weekdays, it originally consisted of 18 prayers and petitions and is therefore also referred to as the Shemona Esrei, which literally means the 18. In the 1st century, a 19th prayer was added, making, okay. So it's not exactly it's not exactly 18, it's 19, okay. Okay. There's a translation here from the Chabad website, which I'm going to post into the Facebook website. Okay. I want to point out that when the Anshe Knesset Hagdalah, the Great Assembly, did this, when they established the Amidah as a standard daily national prayer, this is who they were. Jewish personalities, bum, bum, bum. Realizing that the Jewish people were growing weaker spiritually, a group of wise leaders came together. They expanded the Sanhedrin, which was 70 members, to 120 members, with a special aim of strengthening Judaism. And Ezra was the one who organized this assembly to do this work. So this will be posted, and you'll get a little bit of sense of the greatness of these people, okay? The last thing that the men of the Great Assembly do is they formalize prayer. They actually began a process which is not finished until the 2nd century Common Era, after the destruction of the Second Temple, but they laid down the key principles and structures of formalized prayer. Okay. Now, take a load of this to show you the genius of these men and women, by the way. If I'm not mistaken, that Esther was part of this, but I'm not exactly sure. The centerpiece of each selection of prayers, repeated 3 times a day, is a Shemona Esrei. And each blessing is stated in the plural to underscore the interdependency of the Jewish people, and each blessing is rooted in Torah and Kabbalah. The mystical depth of this prayer, a masterpiece of writing by the Great Assembly, is astounding. For example, the blessing for healing is composed of 27 words, corresponding to the 27 words in the verse in the Torah from Shemot, where God promises to be the healer of the Jewish people. It is said that the text of the Shemona Esrei is so spiritually powerful that even when recited without intention, feeling, or understanding, its words have a great impact on the world. So this is just one of many examples of the command of Tanakh that these people had, of the understanding of its spiritual meanings, so that when they compiled a national prayer that should be done in a meditative format, there was connectedness. The words of the prayers would be directly connected to pasukim, to verses that had that meaning. Okay, and as it described here, that's from Aish, through divine inspiration and sheer genius, the men of the Great Assembly were able to create out of the ashes. Okay, a marvelous thing. Okay. As Rabbi Kaplan says, the power of the Amidah comes from the words themselves. The prayer was carefully composed by highly advanced spiritual individuals so as to enable a maximum relationship with God. Okay. And since the Amidah was composed as a meditation prayer, it is necessary to repeat it as often as possible. It is for this reason that it was required that the same prayer be said 3 times a day. We said that last week. Meditation requires repetition. Just the meditation that we do, the short meditation that we do at the end of this session, requires repetition. You're developing the skill of focusing on something. Okay, meditation requires that. So if a prayer is to serve as a meditation, the prayer has to be repeated. So recognizing that this is a requirement of prayer, the Anshe Knesset Hagdalah required that we daven the Shemona Esrei 3 times a day. We needed that repetition. Okay. And he says, one of the reasons why a mantra works, that serves as a mantra. When people think of mantra these days, it's like Om, Om. But the text of the Amidah is itself also a mantra. And he says, one of the reasons a mantra works is that when the words are said over and over, the mind develops a special resonance with them. The words can be said automatically without special effort or concentration. Since the mind is not concerned with saying the words, it can allow itself to be filled with their meaning. I'm going to tell you something on a personal note here about the power of this. In my martial training, we have periodic testing. And at one of the levels, you have to hold certain positions for a very long time. You have to hold you have to hold 7 different positions, one after the other, 1, 2, 3, in right order, then go back again. And you have to, it could be a very stressful thing physically, and you have to train yourself mentally so that you focus away from the physical stress. And I came up with a mantra. It was breathe, relax, smile. And I would say this over and over to myself as I would practice this and get myself to the point where I could hold the position at the required time. So this whole thing about breathe, relax, smile, breathe, relax, smile, breathe, relax, it became second nature. Now, why am I saying this? Not only did it help me pass that test, but while I was training, I had a bad night, whatever it was, and I was having an awful nightmare. And it was like a really scary thing. And so I'm there, I'm having this dream, and there was a part of me that was aware that I was having a very bad dream. And that part of me started saying, told the guy who was in the dream, say, breathe, relax, smile, breathe, relax, smile, breathe, relax, smile. So I woke up saying, breathe, relax, smile, because way in my subconscious, I knew that this was a mantra I could use to relax myself and remove myself from the stress. So you could see how in the dream state, this whole process worked. The mantras get into your subconscious and you understand what they mean. Now, on a very, saying the words breathe, relax, smile are very simple, surfacey commands. Just imagine the potency that more powerful words would have, such as the words that we have in the tefillot. So this mantra stuff is true, and it's very powerful. Okay. 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 The same is true of a prayer that is said every day. Eventually, one not only memorizes the words, but learns to say them automatically. After one has recited the Amidah 3 times daily for a few years, one can literally say the prayer without thinking. While this is a danger, it is also a great advantage. The danger is that the mind will drift away from the words and the prayer will become meaningless. How often have you seen that happen, where people just buzz through the prayer? Okay, indeed, many people who worship every day find it very difficult to keep their mind on what they are saying. If the Amidah is treated simply as prayer, this is a problem. However, if it is treated as a mantra, then the automatic nature of the recital is a great boom. The words themselves become like a mantra, quieting the mind and removing from it all extraneous thought. This is one reason why we're doing the meditation that we do at the end of each session, because the skill you develop is to move away from all the wash that's going on in your mind and focus on what you're focusing on. So that when you're saying, so you could use the same skill when you're praying. You're saying these words, and if you find your mind wandering, use the skill you're developing and say, nope, let me get back to the words and let the words percolate inside of me. So the skill we're developing is going to come in useful. Okay. Obvious, of course, this does not mean that one should not think about the words of the Amidah, but the way one thinks of the words becomes very different. Instead of thinking of them in an intellectual sense, one allows the words to resonate through the mind. It feels as if the words were conveying their message in a nonverbal manner. Now, this is where a lot of people get caught up, including me, okay? Because you want to intellectualize the words. You want to look, you want to translate the words, and you want to be able to think about the words and think about the gathering of the exiles and think about healing and think about everything else that's said. And what he's basically saying is, let's do that let's do that out of the shul. Let's do that out of the davening. Let's treat that as a separate activity for learning, but relate to the words in a non-verbal, non-intellectual way. Let them percolate. Okay. Now, one question you might have is, well, okay, what happens if somebody's not really familiar with all the themes and ideas and values that are in the tefillot? What happens if somebody's not even familiar with the idea of the ingathering and the exiles, or any one of the themes of the blessings of the Amidah? Okay, you haven't learned about that stuff yet. Rabbi Kaplan is basically going to say that in some way, it's going to have a positive effect on you nonetheless. Does this mean that he thinks that it's because of our soul being Jewish or spiritual, our spiritual nature? Is he saying that the spiritual masters that authored these blessings knew that there's some kind of universal understanding of them? That's going to be one of our questions. I don't quite know exactly, but there's no doubt that Rabbi Kaplan insists that even a novice could have a profound moving experience by constantly repeating the words of these blessings in a meditative manner over and over again. Okay? Okay. Okay, thus, when one says in the first blessing that God is great, one has an overpowering experience of God's greatness. Similarly, when one says that he is mighty, one experiences his infinite strength. Like many experiences in the meditative state, however, these feelings are difficult to describe. Okay. Okay. The Amidah is a single unit that should be said in its entirety without interruption. As a practical matter, however, the first paragraph is the most important part of the Amidah, and that is this section that sets the tone for the rest of the prayer. Okay, so we are right here in 5, how to make the transition to using the Amidah as a meditation. Okay. For a person who has worshiped every day, making the transition to using the Amidah as a meditation may involve a change in orientation. Nevertheless, one who knows the words well and has learned the methods of meditation in general can make the transition. One may have recited the Amidah for years, even from early childhood. The only thing necessary to learn is to say it effectively. So if you've been mouthing the words since you were 13 or 12, whatever it was, then you have to learn to say it in a meditative way. However, a person who is not familiar with the Amidah will have to go through a preparatory period in order to memorize the words and become familiar with them. This period should take a minimum of 30 days. It may be difficult for the neophyte to learn the entire Amidah that perfectly in this short time. Nevertheless, the first paragraph consists of only 42 words, and therefore it can be readily learned. This paragraph itself can be the meditation, while the rest of the Amidah is then read as a prayer. Interesting. So he's basically teaching that there's a meditative way to say it. You say as much as you can in the meditative fashion, and then you can say the rest as a prayer. And hopefully as you go on, more and more of what you'll be saying will be said in a meditative format and not a prayer format. Okay. C, if at all possible, learn this first blessing in the original Hebrew. If you can read Hebrew but do not understand the words, learn at least the translation of these 42 words. And again, I'm going to post the translation of the entire prayer in the Facebook group. If you cannot read Hebrew, try to get someone to transliterate them and learn to recite them in Hebrew. The spiritual benefits that can be gained from this method are so great that it would be worthwhile to learn Hebrew for no other reason than to be able to say the Amidah in its original language. So basically, he's basically saying if you're a Jew and you don't have much background or education and you want to be spiritual, it is essential that you learn at least some Hebrew, at least liturgical Hebrew, so that you can get meaning out of this key prayer. Okay. During the preparatory period, memorize the first paragraph. This is important because this paragraph should be said with the eyes closed. Some authorities say that the entire Amidah should be recited by heart. These authorities state that this was the reason why no prayer books were used during the Talmudic period. Since some people could not recite the Amidah by heart, excuse me, it was ordained that a reader would repeat the prayer aloud for those who cannot say it by themselves. Okay, really interesting here. First of all, say the first paragraph with the eyes closed. Why? Because it's a focal point. It's helping you to focus on the words. You are closing the eyes to eliminate distraction. That in itself is a meditative technique. Okay. Second of all, say it balev, say it by heart. Okay. This was the requirement, okay, to get the most meaning out of it. Make it part of your subconscious. However, they conceded at the time that, and that's why there was no prayer books, because everybody had to learn it. But obviously a lot of people didn't learn it, so they made a concession, they made prayer books. Well, first what they did was they had a shliach at Tzibor who would say it for everybody. And then I guess after that came the prayer books. Okay. Once you have memorized the first blessing, recite it by heart as part of the 3 prescribed services for at least 30 days. After this preparatory period, you should be familiar enough with the paragraph to use it as a meditative device. Okay, so to recap, this is what he's saying. Start with the first paragraph, learn the words. Learn them in Hebrew. If you don't know Hebrew, have somebody transliterate them so you can at least read the English transliteration of that. Memorize it. Make it so that you can say it by heart. Do this for at least 30 days so that at the end of the 30 days, you can get up, you can close your eyes, you can say this. Not only will it have meaning to you, but you'll feel the words. And like most advanced meditators, Rabbi Kaplan uses references to feeling the words. And in the phrase he said earlier, he says, it feels as if the words were conveying their message in a nonverbal manner. This is a common, major quality of spiritual pursuits. You are using the other part of your brain, so to speak, that's not verbal, it's not literal, and you're feeling the words. And I think that when Rabbi Kaplan says, even if you don't understand the words, you understand the concepts behind them fully, then gathering the exiles and healing and everything else, you can still get a feel for them. I think he does maintain that there's some kind of subconscious readiness to appreciate what these ideas and what these words mean. We'll definitely be getting into that further, but that's where he's heading. So one big lesson to draw from here is that when you're taking a meditative practice to your tefillah, to your prayer, you can't treat it as an intellectual exercise. You have to treat it as an artistic exercise where more and more you're trying to get a feel for things. And obviously you have to go inside a little bit, you have to go slower, you have to go more deliberately, you have to make every step count in what you're doing. And these are the characteristics of the meditative approach. Okay, so we got started on the Amidah as a meditation. We're going to continue with this next week. We're going to continue right here with 6, the rules of the Amidah. And we'll see how they apply to using this as a meditation. I'm going to now stop the sharing. I'm going to stop the recording. And we're going to have our brief meditation. When you hear me stop, then we'll have the schmooze. So let's see.